I'm Spencer Mazyck, and joining me now is Timothy Peterson. He is a securities partner at Milbank who, along with his team, advised Virgin Media on its recent $23 billion acquisition by international cable giant Liberty Global. Welcome, Tim. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Spencer. Thanks for having me come along.
So, Tim, first, can you tell us what are the terms of the deal here? What can Virgin Media shareholders expect to receive after everything is finalized?
Well, it's both a cash and stock deal. Obviously, it depends upon what the stock value is on a given day, but there is a significant cash component for the deal. But obviously, a big driver for the shareholders on a going-forward basis will be their investment in Liberty Global going forward. So, it's really a mixed consideration package for the shareholders.
And I think as of February 4th, it implied a price of maybe $47.87 per Virgin Media share. Is that about right?
That's about right. That's correct.
So according to several reports here, Liberty Global has agreed to re-domicile from Delaware to the UK and become a public holding company. What's the reason for the move here, Tim?
Well, I don't think that was, the original driver of the deal from a Liberty Global perspective, but I think as the people were looking at the transaction, it was something that, ironically, both companies had been looking at. The reason for that is that both companies historically have always been had a Delaware holding company, although somewhat unusually, they didn't have any, really didn't have any U.S. assets. And so you had these companies that had U.S. holding companies at the top with primarily European assets or assets outside of the United States. And so that brings up a bunch of inefficiencies, both from a tax structuring, trying to get cash to shareholders. And so it was possible within the time frame of trying to structure this transaction to look at, trying to see whether the merger could be structured in a way where you would create a new UK holding company on top of both companies, and effectively the shareholders on both sides are effectively merging and therefore exchanging their shares for this new UK company. That will be based here, but still listed on NASDAQ.
Do you think we'll see more and more of this happening as companies begin to venture outside of the U.S.?
I think so. I mean, if it turns out that the main part of the company is really outside the United States and therefore is generating a lot of its cash from outside the United States, it may start making some sense. I mean, obviously there's been lots of publicity recently about the amount of cash that U.S. companies are keeping offshore and having difficulty in trying to find ways to bring it onshore. Whether that makes tax sense, or from a long-term structure and strategic standpoint for companies, really is going to be on a case-by-case basis. But I'm sure people will look at this and turn around and ask their advisors in terms of whether this makes something sense for them to consider.
So, Tim, I know you don't represent Liberty Global here, but I have to ask you, what's the acquisition strategy here? Do you have a sense of what it is? Does the company hope to better compete with Rupert Murdoch in the European television market?
Well, I certainly can't speak as to what they want to do with Rupert Murdoch. That would certainly be, I don't think anyone can probably answer that question. But I think if you look at Liberty Global in terms of what it's been doing historically, it has always been an acquirer of good cable assets in Europe and then outside of the European arena. And certainly Virgin Media being, one of the larger cable assets in Europe, would certainly fit within the strategy that they have outlined from the beginning and seems consistent with that strategy.
Right now, there seems to be heightened M&A activity in Europe's television market. Any particular reason why?
I think you're just seeing stronger balance sheets, stronger income statements, and therefore people become more interested in that. I mean, the market had, the financials for those types of companies certainly went through a dip through the last few years, and now you're seeing stronger financial performance from those companies, which suddenly makes them, acquisitions of those companies more financeable.
Do you think that pay television companies and broadcasters are also looking for ways to diversify revenue sources that have come under increased pressure lately?
A little bit of that. I mean, I suppose, again, you'd have to look at each individual company in terms of what you're doing. So it's hard to kind of completely generalize. I mean, each of the different assets in Europe in particular, are very, very peculiar. You obviously have the peculiarity of different jurisdictions. So it's a little bit hard, unlike in the United States, where you can look at one broadcast asset and it wouldn't be that different from looking at it from one state to the other. Buying a German asset versus a Belgian asset or a UK asset can be quite different in terms of how it performs, the regulation it's under. So it's a little bit hard to generalize. You'd have to really look at each situation, and obviously people are I agree with you that it's not surprising that people try to diversify because they obviously saw that if they were too narrowly focused, may find the downturn hit them harder than others.
Yeah, and I mean, if they are actually trying to do that, I think Britain is the place to be. According to several research firms, it is the most lucrative pay television market in Europe. But Tim, I want to get back to the deal for just a second. Is it still subject to shareholder approval, and when do you expect it to close?
So on the deal itself, yes, I mean, this deal requires shareholder approval on both sides. Both the Liberty shareholders and the Virgin Media shareholders will have to approve the transaction. Because it's the merger of two U.S. companies that are listed, you have to go through the normal U.S. process of filing with the SEC a merger proxy and getting that approved, and then ultimately setting up the shareholder meetings. So you're probably at least a couple months away. A lot depends upon the timing, of getting through the regulatory process first before you can launch those shareholder meetings. But once the shareholder meetings happens, the merger is expected to close reasonably shortly thereafter.
And I ask about shareholder approval because, as you know, in the last couple of weeks, there have been several investigations launched by law firms investigating activity by the board of directors here, Virgin Media's board of directors. What's been the specific focus of these investigations?
Oh, you mean in terms of?
There have been claims that the company wasn't shopped around enough, that the shareholders didn't receive fair compensation, and that the Virgin stock was grossly undervalued. Is there any merit to any one of these claims?
No, Spencer. I mean, those are no different than any shareholder lawsuits that you get with any large acquisition. I think obviously the board will take the counsel that they have and obviously defend themselves. But I don't think those shareholder suits are something that people are concerned about.
Well, haven't you been representing for such a long time Virgin Media, even before you joined Milbank some 2 years ago this month? Haven't you had a long-standing relationship with Virgin Media?
Yes. No, I've represented Virgin Media since the merger of NTL and Telewest, which formed the Virgin Media company, and then before that, Telewest during its restructuring. So for quite a long time, since the early 2000s.
Then with this particular relationship, you also brought with you several other relationships to Milbank when you joined, Goldman Sachs and BNP, just to name a couple. But what do you think, Tim, is the key to creating and maintaining a successful client relationship?
No, it's just really obviously attentiveness, looking at what the client is trying to do, look at their goals, their strategies, and then being able to give them advice that allows them to succeed in what they're doing. But I think really understanding what your client is trying to do and working with them very closely is obviously very key.
And how is Milbank sort of leaving its imprint there, making a mark in Europe?
No, very much so. I mean, obviously, it's a very much growing. Milbank has grown considerably even since I joined. It had grown quite considerably since before I came on board. And it's really growing in a number of phases. It basically looks at the different types of practice areas that it has, where it's strong, and tries to find strong individuals to help grow that. And Europe is really no different than other parts of the firm. London in particular has seen some particular growth. We've brought in some very strong individuals in practice areas, and fortunately for us, that they've been very successful.
Well, we want to wish you continued success and growth, actually, with Milbank. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, Spencer. Have a good day.
You too. For more information on this or other topics, subscribe to BloombergLaw.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for joining us. Bye, everybody.